בוקר טוב לכולם, אני שמחה לפגוש את מי שנמצא איתנו. בעצם היום אנחנו עושים הרצאה נוספת בסדרה של הרצאות נגישות בפשטות, מי שזה פעם ראשונה לו, אז פעם בשבועיים, ביום שלישי בשעה 9, בעצם פוגשים אנשים שמתעסקים בנושא הזה של נגישות, במוזיאונים, אתרי טבע, אתרי תיירות, אתרי מורשת, אטרקציות למיניהן, כשהמטרה היא באמת לדבר על נגישות ולחשוב איך אנחנו הופכים את הדבר הזה למשהו שהוא פשוט לביצוע. וקלר תראה לכם פה דוגמאות נהדרות באמת לדברים שלא בהכרח דורשים תקציבי ענק, ויכולים להפוך את הנגישות למשהו שהוא לגמרי רלוונטי עבורנו. אני אגיד מילה אחת למי שלא יודע ולא שמע על זה שאנחנו פותחים שבוע הבא קורס לרכזי נגישות במוזיאונים, באטרקציות, באתרי מורשת. זה בעצם קורס שמיועד לתת כלים פרקטיים מאוד לאיך אנחנו הופכים את האתר שלנו למקום שהוא נגיש, מההתחלה ועד הסוף לכל הלקויות, כשהרעיון הוא באמת לבנות לכם איזשהו תיק לאתר שלכם, שיוכל לשמש אתכם לעבודה הלאה, לעסוק גם בנושא של שיווק לאתרים האלה, אל מי לפנות, איך לפנות, מתי לפנות, נדבר על באמת נפגוש אנשים עם מוגבלויות, נתנסה בזה ונבקר בשלושה אתרים במהלך הקורס, כדי באמת לראות ולהכיר טוב יותר את הנושא הזה מקרוב. קורס שמתקיים בזום, 3 שעות בזום בימי רביעי בבוקר, ועוד 3 סיורים ארוכים במוזיאונים, באתרי מורשת, אטרקציות למיניהם. מי שמעוניין, מעניין אותו, נשמח מאוד, יכולים לכתוב לי פה או באמת כאן בצ'אט, או להתקשר, או וואטסאפ, או כל דבר שנוח לכם, נשמח מאוד. נראה לי שזו ממש הזדמנות לקדם את הנושא הזה בארץ. So I will now move to English, and I hope you will all understand me. 3 years ago, when I started to work to promote the idea of accessibility in museums, I understood that I have to see what is going on in the world. And I flew to London with my colleague, Hani, and we visited some of the biggest museums in London. We went to the National Gallery and to British Museum and to the Natural History Museum and Science Museum, and I guess Claire will talk about some of those museums now. And I saw my dream in life, because I saw that accessibility is something that is taken as granted in London, especially in the museum that I visited. I met people, the people who are responsible for accessibility in all those museums, and I asked them, what do you do? And then I found out that even the biggest museum do some simple things, some things that we can do them without a lot of budget, without too much things to change in the way the museum looks like, but just in the different attention they give. And some of them told me, there is a woman walking around here talking with us about autism in museum. I didn't remember the name back then, and I remember that they have some consultant for that, and that maybe I will have to find this one day. And then Dorit, who is here with us, sent me a link for a Zoom lecture of Claire. And I saw her and I said, okay, I have to find her. And finally I found her. And Claire has an amazing story. I think she's living my dream, actually. The dream I want to have in Israel. I wish it will be the same one day. But we have a lot to study from her. And so she will talk with us, tell us about herself. I will ask her some questions, and at the end, if you have also questions, then I'll be happy to answer you. She will be happy to answer it. And I think I will let you speak now, Claire. Right? You have more to say than me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming along today to listen. I'm going to share my screen. It's mainly photographs about some of the things that I've been doing. So yeah, I should say that when I began this, I wasn't working in museums. I wasn't a museum professional at all, or a consultant. I didn't start like that. So in 2012, I should say, so these are my 3 children. They're quite young there. Now the oldest daughter is 17. She is on the autism spectrum. My middle daughter is 13. She's not on the autism spectrum. And my son, my youngest, is 10 years old, and he's on the spectrum as well. And they are more, they are what we would call Asperger's syndrome, because autism, I don't know how much you know about autism, but it is a spectrum. So you might have someone who's non-verbal, who can't speak, who has learning difficulties, who's in a special school, who needs support for their whole life. Or you might have someone who has something like Asperger's syndrome, who has no problems with speech or learning, but may have trouble communicating, understanding the world, fitting in. My daughter struggles with severe anxiety, which makes life very, very difficult for her. But they are both in mainstream school, so they're not in a special school, they're in mainstream school with support. So in 2012, that my eldest daughter was sort of 7, and we'd been having problems for a while getting her to go to school, lots of behavioural issues, and she was my eldest daughter, so I thought I was just being a bad mother, not getting it, not doing it right. And then eventually we had some problems at school, and we went to the doctor, and we got a referral to a specialist, and they it took a year to get a diagnosis, which isn't actually that long in the UK. It can take a long time, and it's a very difficult decision to go for diagnosis, to do all those steps, but we were really struggling. So it was a very difficult time. My career was completely different. So I was a librarian, a researcher. I have a degree in history and a master's in library and information studies. So I was working part-time at the London School of Economics, the university, in their library, and trying to manage 3 young children. And it all got too much, too difficult. And we were lucky that my father-in-law unfortunately died, but he left us a little bit of money. So me working wasn't the most important thing. So I decided to quit my job to look after the children. And that was difficult because I'd always worked. And I decided that I would volunteer in a museum, just nothing to do with autism, just for me, just to do something different, keep my skills up, learn new things. So I began volunteering in it looks lovely there, it looks very nice, my local museum, because obviously I live in South London, so it takes about 20 minutes to get into the centre of London. So I could volunteer at any museum in London if they wanted me, but local small museums, social history museums, they need volunteers. So I began volunteering here, and I thought I would start a Twitter account, write a blog about what I was doing in museums, write about volunteering. And I didn't really I set it all up and I didn't do anything for about a year as best intentions to do things, never happen. But while I was volunteering, I met a guy from the Museum of London, and he was doing a project. It's called a volunteer inclusion project. And they take people from different walks of life and they bring them together to work on a project for a set period of time. This was 10 weeks, 1 day a week. and you go up to the museum's archive, so not the main museum, but their archaeological archive where all their archaeology is stored. And I went to work on their volunteer inclusion project. So you can see basically it was a dig from the Roman times. It was a Roman villa that was actually down the road from me that I didn't know was there. And it was dug in the 1960s. And we were repacking the archaeology to make space in the archive. And as part of the process, you got lectures and talks about archaeology, and you would visit the main museum site and learn about some of the things that you were handling. So a lot of it was bits of broken pottery, as you can see in the photo there. But I found it, I loved it, absolutely loved it. And they let me take photographs, and I had fun with the photographs, as you can see, like with the question mark, that's part of Roman pottery, just playing around. And I thought I would write a blog about every week, which was quite challenging to go up and do the volunteering, then come home and write a blog every week. But that went really well. And you can see us all there. We actually went on a dig as well to learn how to I couldn't do the archaeology because my knees and my back. I don't think I could do it. But it was such a brilliant project. I loved it. You don't have to have history background. You don't have to want to work in museums. We had a chap who had come out of prison. We had a single mum trying to get back to work. We had me just sort of a bit not really sure what I was doing. So bringing together all different people, and you work opposite each other, repack archaeology, talk. It was brilliant. So that's it. This program features again in the work that I've been doing, which is why I've been talking about it. So while I was writing that blog, again, nothing to do with autism, we went to, as Vereb mentioned, the Science Museum. They ran an early opening called Early Birds, where they opened up at 8 o'clock in the morning. So normal opening is 10, so they open up way before. They keep the numbers low, so they reduce the numbers. It's free, you don't have to pay. They train all their staff in autism awareness, so they all understand about the families who are coming. They keep some galleries open past 10 o'clock, which is really nice if you can't get there very early. So they have a interactive hands-on children's gallery called the Wonder Lab, and they keep that open to 11 o'clock. So you can go in there. And actually now, when we first went, that was a free gallery. That is now a gallery you pay for. But on these events, they keep it free, which is really good. They have lots of activities happening across the museum. Not all the museum is open. They just have certain parts because it costs money, obviously, to have the staff come into the museum early, security, all those kinds of things. So they don't open up the whole museum. And they turn off anything that might be have loud noises. So there's a really big steam engine in the entrance. They turn that off. And when they turn it back on at the end of the session, they let people know that it's going to come back on.
They even turn off the coffee machine, and the machine that dry the hands on the toilet. They turn off all the noises. When they told me, it was like so impressive that they think of those things.
Yeah, lots of autistic children have sensory sensitivities and struggle with sound, lights, smells. But because it is a spectrum, it's really hard to know what might cause a problem for a family. We've had problems visiting the museum. We went to the Museum of London, and they have a tweeting bird song soundtrack in the background, very quiet, But my daughter she was anxious about going. And I think when she's anxious, her sensitivities are higher, and she had a panic attack. It's coming downstairs. She had a panic attack, but we couldn't have predicted that. We didn't know it was going to happen. So that's why having staff trained is really important, because they can support families if something goes wrong. But this was the only museum running these events. We weren't aware of anywhere else. It was the first time we'd gone as a family all together. So this picture is my middle daughter, and she's the one who often misses out, because we can't do things because it's difficult for my eldest daughter. We can't do things because they're difficult for my son. So to go out as a family doesn't happen very often. And it was so lovely. We just had a lovely time, like lots of families have. So I wrote a blog about it, and it was difficult to write because I didn't write about personal family things normally. I gave it to my husband to read. I said, "Is this okay?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's okay. Not too much personal stuff," because my daughter now, she can read those things. So I have to, respect her and how she's feeling. But that blog was, I think my blog's about the Museum of London. I had about 20 views because I just started. And this blog had 1,000 views in a day. And it's been read about 5,000-6,000 times. And it was really amazing. I was like, wow. But it made me realize lots of families wanted this kind of experience, and museums wanted to know how to put it on. And this is where it all really started. So I thought, well, this is, people want to know about this. So I went back to the Science Museum and I interviewed the staff, and I found out how they put the event on. And that was really, really interesting. I wrote about that. We even went back and took over we took over the Science Museum's Twitter account one day for another early birds. So we tweeted as a family to sort of show other people what happened and what went on. That was very, very popular. So that's where it kind of started. But again, I didn't think about doing autism. It was just, I just started to write a little bit about it, giving people advice. But my volunteering has carried on all this time, and I think this is a really big part of maybe why my consultancy works now, because I've been in lots of museums. So I still write a blog about exhibitions. So I go to museums, and I go to lots of different museums. I volunteered there's a museum in South London called the Horniman Museum. And this picture here, I was on their accessibility panel. So they were having a really big redesign of one of their galleries, and they had an access panel. So they brought together people with different experiences. So some had learning difficulties, visual impairment, hearing impairment, I think I said learning difficulties, mental health issues, brought us all together, me as an autism mum, and we helped them with their design for their gallery. And we also chose objects to be displayed within the gallery that related to disability, which was very difficult to find objects. And as soon as you start looking in the online databases to find objects, you're using negative words like blind, deaf, and it pulls back very negative objects. So it was about finding things that represented who we were, and we had themes around family and how people are represented. And that was, it took 4 years, that work on that gallery. But I learned it's easy to tell museums what to do. You must do this, you must do that. But getting something that works for lots of different people is harder. And that was a really important part. And I've been writing, so I joined the RAF Museum, also in London, as their blogger in residence. So for a year I wrote about the First World War. So all this time I'm learning about museums, how they work inside, and what the problems can be in making changes. And so I've just been volunteering, writing the whole time, keep going. I'm also now we have a funding body in the UK called the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and I'm on their panel for London and the whole of the South. So we make decisions on which projects get money, and it's large capital projects up to £5 million. So I make sure when we have projects come that they're looking at accessibility, that they're looking at how they work with communities. So that's been important, because it's very powerful if you want money, that you have to do these things. And that's really important to who we are at the National Lottery Heritage Fund. One of the most important things is that you reach a wider range of people. So if you want money to do your galleries, you need to be thinking about the communities that you work with. So again, I'm learning all the time. So one thing was really hard is finding out about events, because there's one event a year. You know, a museum will put on one event, 2 events, and that's it. And they book out really quickly because they've reduced the numbers. So I thought that I would start to put these events on Autism in Museums website so that families could find the events easily. And from there, I think I started now. I was so busy, people were asking me all the time about how to set up programs, how to help families. And I was so tired from helping people for free. I was exhausted. So I helped the Natural History Museum set up dinosaurs. I went in and chatted to them. And then in, I guess, 2018, I decided to make this more of a consultancy where I actually asked for money, which was difficult because I'd just come as an outsider. I didn't see myself as a professional. And it's still difficult to sort of say, because I want to help. I want museums to be better, but I work really, really hard, and I was tired and had, you know, I'd accumulated a lot of knowledge about how to help. So eventually I became a consultant. So I've worked with lots of museums. I often help museums just with email. I'll just give them some tips. I do that for free. But I've worked with the Jewish Museum in London on their early openings called Curious Explorers, the British Library, their first relaxed openings. I helped the V&A they have a family exhibition. It was a temporary exhibition called Winnie the Pooh, and that was their first relaxed opening. And say the National Army Museum. I worked with the Royal Academy of Arts. We were working on a visual story. So a visual story is a very simple document with lots of photographs that explains what's going to happen when you visit a museum, because a lot of autistic people struggle with social imagination. So we can go to a museum and we're like, we're going to see some art, we're going to see some sculptures, we know what's going to happen. It'll be it might be quiet, it might be a busy one, we know this, you know, what you can touch, what you can't. An autistic person doesn't know what's going to happen, can't make those predictions, or know how to behave in the museum. What, can I touch this? Can I not touch this? Am I allowed to make noise? All these kinds of things. So you do a visual story and it explains what's going to happen when you visit. And I always, because I'm not autistic and autism is such a spectrum, I always work with autistic people. so that we hear lots of different voices about what works. So at the Royal Academy of Arts, I work with a charity called Ambitious About Autism, and they have a youth panel who are 16 to 25. And they came with me and we walked round the gallery and we think about things we'd like to put in a visual story, what they would like to see. So it's always important to talk to autistic families or autistic charities. And some schools in the UK, you might have a special autism school, or you might have a mainstream school with an autism part. And it's always important to talk and collaborate. Yeah, and at the moment, I'm just working on a visual story for the Tate Modern as well.
I just wanted to ask, so this visual story is being sent to the school or the family that are making the reservation, actually?
Yeah, some are on the website. If you just search for visual story, you'll find them all over the place. Some are on the website, which is good to have there for anyone. Some are sent out in emails if you've booked on a special event, because it might be a visual story about the whole building, just a general visual story, or it might be about a specific event. And some are printed out, available on the day. So when you turn up, you can have a copy with you, so you can have a look at it. And it helps lots of different groups. It's not just about autistic visitors. If you have visitors with dementia, if you have visitors who are very anxious, I think one good thing from COVID is lots of UK museums have been thinking about how do they explain the new rules, social distancing, one-way routes, people wearing masks, and they're doing visual stories or videos to explain what's going to happen, and it does help. We did some training. So the other thing I do, I run training with a charity called Kids in Museums, and we run that around the country, all about autism in museums, how to do a visual story. And we had one case study, and she had done a visual story, and her site was a heritage site, so an abbey, an old abbey with lots of doors and entrances, and they had done a visual story explaining how to get into the site. And they had a group of new mums, and this lady hadn't left the house. You know, this is the first time she was coming out, and she said without the visual story she would have been too anxious to come, but it reassured her she was in the right place. So it helps lots of different people, and I think that's quite a good way to sell it to museums. Why should we do this? Because it helps lots of people, not just autistic people. And the biggest consultancy work I've done was with the British Museum, and they did a Morning Explorers event. So you see this young guy just lying on the floor in the Great Court, which was just such a brilliant event. We kept the numbers low. The whole museum wasn't open, just some galleries. We themed it. And we had some activities. But if you've been to the British Museum, which is absolutely busy all the time, to have something like this is amazing. And it's not always about looking at the exhibit. Sometimes it's just about being in that space, in that amazing, you know, lying on the floor, looking at the ceiling. And half the families who came to that first event were visiting for the very first time. So that's where you know you're making a difference. And we had these little pop-up sensory tents. That's what the other picture is. So if it got too much, so children inside were sensory toys, lights, you know, some cushions, they could go in the tents and just kind of block out everything. And they were really popular. They're very low cost, doesn't cost a lot of money. And we had them dotted about near the activities. It's difficult with COVID, obviously, that's more of an issue at the moment, but it's something that worked very well. So hopefully they'll be able to come back in the future. So as I say, I run training with kids in museums, and that works really well because I'm on my own, and they have more of a network, so they can do a lot of the administration and book places. We always have case studies. People come and talk about what they've been doing, so we're learning all the time. And I also raised some money. We did what we called a museum marathon. So all those people outside the Science Museum, we walked to 26 museums in London, and we raised money for autism in museums. And then I used that money to buy sensory equipment, which we gave away for free to museums. And again, it's so important to work with autistic people. So I put the call out and said, who wants this sensory equipment? I broke it into chunks. And I had, like, I don't know, 200 museums wanted. It was ridiculous, all across the country. So rather than me deciding who got it, I got the young people from Ambitious, which is this photo here, and they read the applications and they decided who should get the equipment, which was really lovely that they had the decision.
Can you please tell us more about this sensory equipment? What?
Yeah, sure. I think in the next, I've got some pictures. There's another project. I'll go forward and then I'll come back. Yes, so here's, for example, is a sensory pack. So it has ear defenders and just sensory toys. You know, you can get things that are very expensive, but equally you can just get things that don't cost a huge amount of money. So this is was an event at the National Army Museum. So they had a room that they set aside for a chill out space, sensory space. So it doesn't have to be permanent. If you're just putting on an event, it can be a temporary space. And, you know, they have these giant bean bags, which you can see on the right. There's my kids just chilling out. And then you have these sensory toys. So when you walk around, you can fiddle with them, because distraction is very important. We find that works quite well. So if my daughter's very anxious when she comes to a museum, these toys can distract her, and that helps a lot. But like that pop-up tent, it doesn't have to cost loads of money. So yeah, another project that I worked on, which was really, it's very sunny, which I worked on. So I did that volunteer inclusion project with the Museum of London. And I sent out all these family events that I had. And this autism charity near me called Casper said that was great, but they have young adults, 16 to 25, who've left school, who can't find work, they're not in education, they're just, you know, they can do so much, but little things are stopping them, maybe anxiety. Going for a job interview is so stressful. So if you have anxiety, it makes it very hard. So we ran this project. I went back to the museum and said, can we run the volunteer inclusion project for these autistic young people? And they did. They said, yes, let's do that. So they worked on, again, archaeology, same kind of thing that I had done. This was a site in Fulham, and they were pottery bottles that had these medallions on that you can see here. So they repacked them, they measured them, they did photography, they did database work, they had lectures, and all this they had, they got a certificate at the end that explained all the things that they'd been doing. And for the very last week, they had to do public engagement and go to the museum and speak to people about what they had been doing. And a lot of it was about social skills. Many autistic people struggle with communication, when to speak, when to listen. And a lot of this work was, we did little games to help with communication. So we'd start the day, like we'd go around the table, what have you had for breakfast? Ask the person next to you what you've had for breakfast. And then you have to tell the group So little things, but just helping with that communication. And this was a game we played. It was called Family Fortunes. I don't know if you've ever, but they had to like remember the facts, like a quiz. They went to the museum at the end. Everyone came and they spoke to the public about what they had been doing. And that was a brilliant project. And some just got confidence about traveling into London. It wasn't about working in museums. And this picture here, they got to go to City Hall in London and they won awards for the best team. So it was a really brilliant project, but it's one project, it's quite small. It's how do you keep these things and do more of them?
I will tell you that in the next lecture in 2 weeks from now, I'm going to host Neil from Germany, and he's going to speak about the project of people with disability guiding in museum, people with a mental retardation. I don't know how you call it in English today, but guiding in museums as part of the team. So it's also a volunteering project, an amazing volunteering project.
And I think it's hard to get across how important it is for those families and for those young people when you have a project like that. It's life-changing. A lot of those young people weren't leaving the house. One family said that their son, he didn't come and eat dinner with them. He sat in his room. And during this project, he came down, he wanted to sit with the family and tell them what he'd been doing. He took photographs, he wanted to show them the photographs. So it does, I found that project life-changing as well. And it just shows you what a small project working with archaeology that's been sitting there for years in a store can make a huge impact. So the Horniman Museum, so this is the Horniman Museum and the gallery that we worked on. So this was a big project that had a lot of money behind it, but some of the changes that the accessibility panel brought in were more seating. We made sure that there were sight lines, because you can't see it here, but when you walk in the gallery, there's big displays in front of you, and it can be a bit, what's going to happen when I go through there? So we had displays that you could see through into the gallery. So just little things. That we did a tactile map, which you can see here, and we used colours. That was another thing from the two people on the panel who had learning difficulties, to encourage them to have an independent visit. We used colours, because they had a helper who came, and he said, if I want to encourage them to go on their own, if I can say, well, why don't you go to the yellow section, it helped them, because all the words and the text was too difficult. So saying go to the Africa section was what's the Africa section. So he said, if we can use colours, it will help them independently look at the gallery. And I don't know if you can see on the right because of the screen sharing, but we chose African masks, and one of the young people drew pictures in response to the masks. So things that went in the case were also made by us as well. So it was a really lovely project. And this was just my object that I chose. So as I said at the start, finding an object that relates to disability is very difficult. And I found it, I was like, God, what object relates to autism? So I don't know. And the lady who worked with us said, it's not about an object that relates to autism, it's about an object that relates to you. And to me, it was about family, because I have 3 children, obviously, and 2 are autistic, 1 isn't, but to me, they're all the same. And I love them all the same. And this object, it has a young child climbing up her back. It's an African Afro sculpture from Nigeria. and she has one child on her lap, and she actually has one further down her back. So it was the 3 children. So to me, that was just about family. And autism is a hidden disability. You can't always see someone and know they're autistic, and that's why I sort of chose this object. But having those conversations about disability in a gallery, it's really important. And some objects were challenging because there were masks representing people who might have epilepsy, but for African people, sometimes they felt that was bad spirits and demons. So talking about these difficult topics was really important in the gallery space. So I think if you're going to do make changes, you know, I think make inclusive exhibitions or programming, it's setting the context. I think getting people to understand why it's important. I think that's why Autism in Museums has done so well, because I've written about it and told the story of why it's important. So this is a tweet from a family. Again, you know, they go to Dinosaurs where it opens up early. Without that event, they would not be able to come to the museum. So you're really showing that this is helping families. Early intervention, supporting autistic people when they're young to do all these things really helps them when they grow up. So it's important to do these things early. So 700,000 people in the UK are autistic. If you include their families, which obviously you have to because they go out together, that's 2.8 million people. So it's not a small number. And lots of surveys, particularly with COVID as well, many families feel isolated. So 70% of these families felt isolated. So you're really making a big impact. And post-COVID, that's even more important. And I think setting the context, explaining why it's important is a first step. And in terms of inclusive exhibitions, this is the RAF Museum. They open new galleries. They work with an accessibility panel. But many people with disabilities are sensory learners. So they want to be able to touch, to smell. And although we've talked about autistic people and how they can struggle, it's not about taking away all the exciting things in a museum. It's about explaining what you have. If you have a very dark gallery, if you have galleries with lots of noise, it's explaining that. Then maybe if it's a very sensory experience to visit your museum, maybe it is about a sensory hour where you turn those things off. And that helps people with dementia as well. So this, at the RAF Museum, they also have exhibitions you can smell, exhibits you can smell to help engage the senses. Many autistic people have said that museums aren't interactive enough. They can't, you know, there's not enough to touch and to understand. So having these sensory backpacks, maybe having examples of what you can see in the bag so you can touch it, helps people understand what they're seeing. And it really is about a holistic approach. It's the whole museum, not just training, learning staff, education staff, but people, what we call front of house, security, the people you meet when you first walk through the door. And many museums in the UK now are starting to have these changing places, toilets. So if you come with a disabled adult and they need to use the toilet, you know, normally there's no place. If they need to be changed, these toilets make a huge difference for lots of families. So I think training staff, and sometimes that can just be showing some short videos, you know, just to what autism is, why families struggle. It doesn't have to be really expensive training for everyone, you know, a whole day. It can just be little things, thinking about the whole environment. So I mentioned visual stories. Another thing that museums are doing are sensory maps. So this explains what's going to happen again when you come to the gallery. And this looks at lighting, noise, how many people they're going to be there, what you can do in the museum, what you can get your hands on. So this is from the National Museum of Scotland, and that's just one piece, but there's a big building with lots of floors, and each floor they've explained where might be quieter, might be busier, and these help people visit as well. And again, it doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money, but it's a good idea to work with people who are autistic or who have dementia to help you understand about your museum and space. And the visual story. So yes, like I was saying, simple pictures. So this one here really shows you what the museum looks like. And you can use arrows. You can put arrows on there to sort of say, like, this is the entrance. Some places are confusing. There's lots of doors. Where do I go? Showing what staff wear. This from the Army Museum, the ladies in green. What the building looks like, what staff are going to wear, what you can see, what you can do, you know, what you can touch, what you can't touch. All these things help people and ease anxiety. And again, like we're saying, with the sensory backpack and the chill out space. So yeah, that's kind of everything. But there's lots on my website. I ask museums to write blogs about what they're doing, and they go up on the website. So if you need more, and there's a newsletter which you can sign up for on my website, and that normally has examples of what's happening in museums. But I do think COVID has made it very difficult. People are worried about sensory backpacks, what people can touch, how the cleaning should happen. And lots of staff in the UK are losing their jobs, and they are also staff that do this work. So it is a worry. It felt like so many museums were doing this work, and it does feel like we've taken a step back. But as I say, it's looking for positives. So one-way routes are very popular with lots of autistic people because they get anxious when they visit and they don't know where to go. So having a route that's, you know, they have to visit is good. This pre-booking with social distancing is working for some families because there's less people, and that works. So there are some positives. And as I said earlier, doing videos or visual stories explaining the new COVID rules to visitors works for lots of different people. So there's certainly some positives. But I don't know if you have any questions or anything you wanted to ask me.
Well, I have some, but if somebody else wants to ask, then go ahead and I will ask it later. So I will ask you, first of all, you showed us this, the picture of the woman that you said that was what you chose.
Yes.
Can you tell us how would you explain this structure for a person with autism?
That's a good question, because I think this is where it's difficult. It's a large sculpture. It sits at the bottom of the case, and the label about it, which is just to the right, is more about my decision to choose the object. It doesn't really describe the object in great detail. And that was one of the issues with working on the project. Anyone who's done exhibition designs, you only have, 150 words, and trying to work with people who don't understand museums, and all this weeks of talking about themes and what we wanted to get across, and then having 150 words to say it was difficult. But But I think there was still more to do here. You know, we spoke about having trails around the museum, because why should the story of disability be restricted to one case and one display when objects throughout the whole museum relate to disability? So what we wanted to do was to have a trail. That might have been a paper trail where you could go from this and talk about these things and then go to other areas in the museum. But again, it depends on the money that you have, but there's a really good charity in the UK called Vocalize, and they do audio description of objects for visually impaired and blind people, and they'd be great to have a talk. But they do training about how to explain what objects are, and they're really, really good. But it would have been nice to have, you don't even have to have a replica of that object, but if you have, say, in a sensory bag, wood, you know, that you can touch, so you can feel what a bit of carved wood might feel like, or smooth wood, that kind of thing can make a really big difference. I think it just helps people understand. But my son actually went to the exhibition on a school trip, and I went on the trip, and I showed them, and him and his friend, and they were talking about the objects in the case, and it was really lovely.
Nice. And another question I have is like, what do you suggest for the people here? What to put their efforts, or what to put the budget on? I mean, they have a limited budget. So what do you suggest? Where to begin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot of the training I do, it's about low cost, small steps that people can make. Okay. And I would say definitely training. And training doesn't have to cost a fortune. So in the UK, I recommend, there's a number of videos. You know, what is autism, first of all? How does it affect people? And we have charities that have short videos on their website that you can look at for free. And one of them is from Ambitious About Autism, and that's about the young people explaining what autism is to them. Because I think it's very different in different countries. Like I don't know how autism is seen, and whether people think it's a negative thing. In the UK, I think being autistic is not seen as such a bad thing anymore. You know, people are very proud to be autistic. So that makes a big difference. Thinking about terminology. So we often now say, so the official diagnosis is autistic spectrum disorder. And my daughter wouldn't see herself as having a disorder. It's just that her brain works in a different way. So we like to say autistic spectrum condition. It's just something, you know, and saying she is autistic. That is who she is. It's not a person with autism, like a person with diabetes, like it's a separate disease. You know, it's just her, it's the way she is. So having conversations about terminology is important, but it's not being afraid. You know, people are worried, will I say the wrong thing? Will we do the wrong thing? I think if you work with autistic people, invite them in to give you feedback. It's really, really important. So definitely training. And as I said, it doesn't have to cost a huge amount. There's a video on YouTube from the National Autistic Society called Too Much Information. And I can share the link. So the sun's come out. I can share the link with you. And it's a mother and son walking through a supermarket, and he has sensory overload. And it kind of explains what it can be like for autistic people. And I think that video, which is 2 minutes long, is very powerful.
Yeah, I know this one.
But also just walking your spaces. You know, one of the exercises I do on training is send everyone, normally we're in a different museum, we send everyone out into the museum, and they just stand there for a minute and they just listen. And they think about how they're feeling, What can they hear? Are they hot? Are they cold? Are there bright lights? Is there lots of noise? And it's about understanding your spaces, because you either in your own museum never actually go in the galleries because you're in your office, or you forget what it's like to visit for the first time. And then a visual story doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It's always a good idea to work with groups, but you can do it, just do it, get it done, then get feedback. Just say to people, we're just trying, will this work? Does this help? And I think that doing those things are really, really important.
It's interesting what you said about the terminology, because in Israel it's exactly opposite. We don't say today disabled people, we say people with disabilities. We don't say a blind, we say a person with visual impairment. So you're just on the opposite direction, and maybe we will get
and changes. There's no agreement in the autistic community. They've done surveys and people want different things. I try and read and then go with what seems to be the preferred option, but it does change and people get worried about saying the wrong thing. But I think if you're open and you're working with groups, that's where you can have more understanding. Because if you say, well, we've worked with an accessibility panel, we've asked the questions, this is what they've said to us, this is how they want to be represented. And I think you can't argue with that as long as you're asking the questions. It's like, if you notice, a lot of those events, they're morning explorers, early birds, curious explorers. They're not the autism event. It's not autism morning. And that's, I think, really important, because you're not going to the museum for a doctor's appointment. You're going for a family day out. And when we first started to go to the Science Museum, my daughter had just been diagnosed, and she was 7, we hadn't really sat down with her and said, you are autistic, this is what it means for you. So the last thing we would have wanted was to go to a museum and they say, oh, welcome to the autism event. And she would be like, well, what? What's that? So, terminology is important. And quite often now they're sensory hours. They're for people who have sensory sensitivities, who might have autism, who might have what in the UK we call it SEND, special educational needs and disabilities. So it's more aimed at, that's a terminology used in schools, but for families with additional needs.
Okay, there is one question on the chat. If you are able to read it and maybe answer it, it will be great.
Let me just stop that, sorry. Right. I want to ask you, official policy. Yeah, I mean, we have the Disability Act. There are certain things that museums have to do, but quite often that's more about physical access. And even a few years ago, if you were talking about accessibility in museums, and even a few museums now, if you say accessibility, they're thinking about physical access, ramps, lifts, not intellectual accessibility. And we still have a long way to go in interpretation, making that accessible to everyone. But you're right, you kind of forget, you take it for granted in the UK how much good work there is. But you have to keep pushing and battling all the time. Many autistic families say, well, that's not accessible if it's one event that's an hour at 8 o'clock in the morning. I want to come whenever I want to come. I don't want to just come to your special 1 hour. But to me, it's about making those first steps to expose my daughter to a sensory hour. We do it a lot. She starts to get confident and understand the museum, the environment. She knows staff understand. So then we started to stay later. And past that, we can now visit the Science Museum. If we go early in the morning when it's a little bit quieter, we can go in regular hours. We don't have to go to the special opening. So to me, it's just about offering a range of options. You know, you might just, a visual story can help people sensory backpack and training when they visit at any time when you're open. But then you might need a sensory hour for families who find it harder. And even that doesn't work for some families. I don't think we are reaching families who have severe need, who are autistic and non-verbal and really struggle. I don't think we're reaching those families.
So that's another challenge, you mean, that you have to still.
Yeah.
There is another question there, maybe even two.
Yeah, how can you make it inclusive when it's replaced every month? Yeah, I think that's still a battle to get museums to understand. Even if you do a visual story, you need to update it. You need to keep working on it. And we've had these conversations, but it should be built into your programming that you have a new exhibition. So what might be challenging in that exhibition? The Tate Britain are having an art installation, and I think it's sensory, very loud, very noisy. So how can they support visitors? It's each time thinking about that. So it's not about taking everything out, but it's about the visual story. This is what's going to happen if you come and visit this exhibition. And it's about maybe offering a sensory space, a chill out space. So if someone is overwhelmed, that they can go and there's a quiet room and they can go and sit, and that can really help.
I always say that to museums that I work with, just create options. Don't create only one option that you always have noise. Have the ability to shut the noise down if somebody wants to, or just to press a button and then to have the noise. So people will have different options.
Definitely, having control is really important. Because my daughter we've managed to go to a concert. You know, it's not about noise levels in general, but it's about how anxious she feels and the control that she has. But you'd be amazed how many exhibitions, when we walk round, they say to me, can you give me a list of everything that's going to cause a problem? You know, and I'm like, I don't know. Depends on the person visiting. I can't give you a list specifically saying. But also, if I say, oh, this is a bit loud, can you turn this off? They can't, they have to turn everything off, or you can't just turn off one thing. So building in, I think that's the other thing. It's like with the access panels, if you're going to do that work, if you've got even temporary exhibitions, having an access panel is, I think, really good. But bringing them in early enough to make a difference. Not, we've made all the plans, you know, and then you can't change anything. So if you're doing anything major, the reason it worked at the Horniman Museum and it took 4 years is we came before, right at the start. The exhibition designers came to the access panel. They presented their ideas. We presented our ideas. We looked at the designs together. Not everything came through, you know, not every change was made, but that's, but more of a collaboration.
That's great. Does anyone have any more questions, or we'll conclude now? I want to tell you, Claire, first of all, thank you very much. I think you gave us a lot of information, and the most important thing is that most of the things are not so complicated.
No, really not.
It's quite simple to do, most of them. A visual story is something that is quite easy to do, and is a great thing and great help for everyone, for every family, I think, not just that family with special needs. So that's a great idea. And those backpacks, the sensory backpacks are something very easy to make. Or a lot of times it's just about the attention, really, and the thought before, before.
Sorry, that was me, because I was just getting the video with the too much information.
Great.
Put the link in there.
Amazing. Thank you for all those amazing ideas. I want to say that I also do some trainings in Israel, accessibility trainings, and I usually bring with me people with different disabilities, and the view that they give, the ideas they give are very, very important. Sometimes they see things that me and most of the people here can't see even, can't even understand. And when they put their light on this thing, then we find out that it's something quite simple to change. And it's very important. So thank you very, very much, really, Claire. And if you want to put your details, you wrote it before, you showed it on the slide, but if you want to write it on the chat, then it will be wonderful for people who wants to ask you questions or whatever. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have here Neil, I said before, from Germany, who is going to talk about a volunteering project with people with disabilities, guiding in museums. And 2 weeks after, we are going to talk about the accessibility websites, which are also an important thing to know. If somebody wants to ask more questions or talk, you know my details, and I will be happy to answer. And thank you so much. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you very much for asking me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, really. It was really interesting. And I told you before, but I hope soon we will be able to fly.
Yeah.
You're more than welcome to come and visit here.
No, definitely. And I can, introduce you to some of the people that run the programs. They're always so friendly and supportive, and I'm always sending people to other people to see what they're that's the really important. It's like, go and see what they're doing. So what you're doing, sharing information is so important in the process.
Yeah, that's really important, because really nice things are being done here in Israel, but it's not that published yet, not enough.
I think talking about it is really so important. I think those blogs, because they were a story and they were passionate, I think that made a big difference. And museums are doing great work. I'd love to hear what's going on in Israel, but it is talking about it and sharing it is so important. Yeah,
it is. I think so. And also the idea of early birds is something so easy to do. I remember that in London they showed me like they told me that every Saturday different museum has a special program. And I think it's something that my dream is to do it in Jerusalem. I think it's totally possible.
We've missed, there's been no events at all. Obviously, museums have been closed, and even when they opened last summer, they were a bit worried about, what programs to run. But the London Transport Museum put up 4 or 5 events 2 weeks ago, and within a week, the first one had already booked out. The demand is there. Families want that. So for me, my job now is to say, look at the Transport Museum. I'm tweeting. They've put their event up and it's all booked out, and it's just shouting about it, talking about it all the time, and that keeps it in people's minds.
Maybe that's also a thing we should do here. I will try to make that also.
It's hard work. keeping it going.
We begin with the little steps.
Exactly.
It's also good.
All right, lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire. Have a nice day.
Bye.